This conference will now be recorded.
Oh, cool. And people like to go to meetings and
Well, that's what I do at the 12 o'clock, and so that's how I record it and then put it on on Canvas, so people that missed it can do it.
cool. But are there people like live? Like,
No, but there are at noon. Yeah, so when I'm doing the class at noon, I'm talking to the people in the room, and I'm also like on the chat function, so I try and incorporate both of them.
yeah. I
Yeah.
watched the lecture. I didn't realize that I was a part of it until like the very end. I was like, "Can you hear me?" It's like, yeah.
You really can't hear though in the room. Like it's so like I repeat what people say because I don't think.
Oh yeah, no. I meant I was on my computer, like in bed, and at the end of it, I said, "Like, can you hear me?" And it was like, "Yeah, I can hear you," in front of like all the people and stuff. And I think I was on the webcam too. But yeah. So it doesn't matter. The ambiguous background and stuff. It was kind of fun.
Okay, so I'm going to get started today. We're moving on from the general part. Welcome back. Jay came back for, he wanted a refresher, so he's been with us, but welcome back, Marissa and Jessica. And what we're going to do now is we're going to do the part that is character strengths. And there's 4 sessions, and the first one is we're going to focus on what your strengths are. The second one is how you leverage them. The third is recognizing strengths in others, and the fourth is how you can get clients to leverage their strengths. So today we're just going to focus on your own strengths. And so last week, or the week before actually, we did a story, we broke them into pairs, and we did a story where you talked about yourself at your best. Now, you guys did it last semester, so that's going to be really hard to remember, but you told a story of when you were at your best. And so what I want you to do is to kind of remember that and then look through, get out your, hey, come on in. Okay. Hey, nice to meet you.
I told you about this visit today.
Yeah, come on in.
Great.
Fun.
So I want you to pair up and, well, actually, first look at your list of your top 5. Did everybody bring them? And I want you to go back to that story and think through what were your strengths. And then share with your partner how your strengths were part of that story.
So I remember what mine was that I was the same day. It's like new stuff.
Because I know the little things.
At the time that I did this, I was talking to the marketing convention for really great people. It was a lot of fun, and I loved teaching that sort of so I think her perspective So ways of looking at the world, a lot of expression, curiosity for sure. Curiosity, I think, conceptualize, forgiveness, like, not really, judgment, creativity and forgiveness, I don't know, those are really huge parts of it, but thinking things through and examining science, yeah, so I tried to do that, and the more recent thing was I got to finally COVID-19, which I'm really interested in. And with those, I feel like I got to illustrate a little bit more of creativity, judgment, curiosity, and stuff. It's interesting doing this and like seeing how much they can feel and how much is also myself, you know. But it makes sense. The ones that got collected, braver. I'm like that. So, spirituality is 20. Yeah, love is really interesting.
Did everybody get a chance?
Like love of learning is here. That's like what got me.
Yeah. Okay. Great. All right. So hopefully, were you able to pull strengths from your best time? Yeah. Probably you weren't aware of them before. You weren't. I said, were you able to pull strengths from that time when you were at your best? But you probably weren't aware of it, right? You didn't have the language to talk about like what was going on or why you were feeling so energized, right? Let me close this. Okay. So what are character strengths? They're, for those of you that are clinical, this is the opposite of the DSM, right? So the DSM categorizes people for mental illness, and Martin Seligman and Chris Peterson said, hey, we don't have anything to describe what's right with people and what makes people thrive. And so they came up with these 24 characteristics. It's, this has been validated, well-researched. This survey's been going on for a while. I believe it's a bit shorter than it used to be. But anyway, character strengths are universal, meaning they're valued across all cultures. They are fulfilling to use, so they feel good when you use them, your top ones especially. They're morally valued. They don't diminish other people when you use them. And we know that they're measurable, right? They're reliable and valid. And the key thing to understand about your strengths is when you're using them, you're excited, energized, and engaged. And this was something I didn't really put together before. I knew about strengths for a really long time, but in some of the recent books I've been reading, Michelle McQuaid specifically, understanding that my energy level and that flow of energy is really dependent on how I'm using my strengths. So one thing that's important is to look at your own energy around different projects, work, school, whatever, where it is. And when you find it down and when you find it up, just noticing when you're using your strengths and when you're not. Okay, so why do we care? What's good about strengths? And there are individual outcomes, meaning if you use your strengths, good, there's good outcomes for you, and you're better able to buffer stress and manage problems. You have improved relationships, you have enhanced well-being and health, and better performance, right? So the other thing is, for you business psych folks, there are work outcomes. So when you get employees using strengths, and some of these things we'll talk about, love, kindness, you may think, well, that's not very business oriented, but actually using your strength, doesn't matter which one it is. And the more you use it, the more engaged you are. People who use more strengths have faster growth and development. They experience more meaning at work. They're more creative and agile. They have less counterproductive work behaviors. These are some IO acronyms for you. And they have more organizational citizenship behaviors, right? So they're doing less stealing, less time on Facebook, and more, which is stealing, and more things to help out the organization and other people. Okay, so the model from Ryan Nemec at VIA is that you've got to be aware of your strengths, then you explore them, then you apply them. And so you guys have taken the first step. You're now aware, you now have your report. And the second step is that we're going to explore. And what I want you to do is, we're going to partner up. And first, I want you to talk about, what was your initial reaction when you saw it? Were you surprised? Did it fit? Did it feel right? Were you like, this is not me at all? So I want you to have a discussion around that for the next couple minutes.
Yeah, I understand this, I understand this. I don't understand.
So like,
Yeah.
perspective, creativity is interesting. I think that had a lot to do with so yeah, it had to do with the only thing I could do to play is I have new ideas to solve whatever. Yeah, so I see that. Makes sense. So, oh yeah, what was I surprised?
So it sounds like
Social intelligence. What was learning was surprisingly low. Is that has to do with all, sort of forgiveness. Level of learning is like the top thing. So when I'm thinking, I was like, what questions was that? Like where mastering new skills, confidence, and bodies. I mean, it's interesting because I think so. When I scored low on that, probably because I said, I don't need it, but it doesn't mean I don't want to learn. I just use, audio media, lectures, I use a lot of scholarly articles and just sort of like the abstract and stuff, so I don't like read all the time. So that's not learning. I watch like lectures and courses videos. What about you?
Before, and I think that the biggest thing was how they changed.
Was it consistent? Yeah.
So these two, the honesty and humility were, I think, number 2 and 3. Like kindness is number 1, and love is number 5. So like, so probably like out of the top 5, 3 of them were trying to say,
Yeah. It is interesting. Yeah.
Right, because I did this for the past 2, and I also just how another love is value, right? And also, yeah, I was her purpose and being too.
Yeah.
Even though it's, and I know it's just that lost our sleep.
I think it also, the way that I think about this, you know, there's something else to say, right? So safety and like just the moment that it's concentrated, you know, like long-term attributes. And I think that this is totally state, like for the most part, the states are like some of these are said, some of them are state. But I think the big benefit is that it's the stuff that I have to work on. Yeah. Because you know what I'm saying? Like that's the big thing. Even if it's at this, even if I had more of that in the past, which is not great, it's still like that means that right now it comes out more. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. To bring them up without bringing the other ones in. You know?
Okay, so let me just, you're going to continue. I just want to pause for a second and say, and just kind of check in and say, how did it feel? And did they fit? Were you surprised? Anybody?
It generally fit.
I would share with Marissa that when I took mine, I took mine last semester, and my top one is gratitude. And so I remember sharing with you, like, how does it show up in the workplace? Like, you know, like my second one was love. I was like kind of freaking out a little bit about how these, what things would be kind of like very soft skills, how they showed up in the workplace. Dr. Thompson really explained, she gave some examples of how that these strengths really do show up in the workplace.
Well, and I always think of Jane Dutton's work on high quality connections, you know, and look at your ability to leverage connections and relationships. I mean, that's hugely important in any job. So yeah, I you know, I like rephrase those into like, I'm good at high quality connections.
Yeah.
That's what you should say.
That's good.
Anyone's like, no, this did not fit, or like this is.
I spoke a little bit about how there's like state versus trade now.
Ah, yes.
And so I think a lot of some of the lower stuff, to be honest, was like stuff that I haven't been practicing lately. But if it was like a year ago or 2 years ago, you know, for example, like spirituality was far more salient like 3 years ago. So it's not necessarily that the fact that it's low on the list means that like trait-wise, you know, it's this long-term thing. But rather the benefit is that it just tells me that in this moment, that's something that, you know, kind of sticks out as something to work on because I know we can be sort of higher on there and it would be beneficial.
Okay, so it's great. So you're saying, you know, talking about what's at the bottom and what's at the top. And so one thing we know is that the things that are at the bottom, like the bottom 5, aren't going to move to the top, and the things at the top 5 aren't going to move. But and I was sharing, like, when I got out of a leadership role, my leadership score went down 3 or 4 spots, right? But it's kind of still in the middle.
Oh yeah.
Right. It didn't go to the top or the bottom, but it's kind of in the middle. And one thing that's really important is you don't want to work on the ones in the bottom. And I heard you ever say, and this is what everybody does, we get our results and we went straight to the bottom. What am I not good at, right? That's our negativity bias at play. But the idea being, and I did some corporate training yesterday, and there were a couple of people who are very religious, and they were like, now spirituality is in my top 5, but it wasn't my number 1. And I thought it should be my number 1, right? And so I don't think it has to do, you know, like, it's not a bad thing. And I do think we do call on things. Like, I know that there's time where bravery, you know, might have jumped from my like number 7 to up to number 5 or 4 or something like that in certain situations. Yeah, so I do think there's like this state versus trait, but like, not that we can't do any of these. And I think the other thing that to keep in mind is it's a ranking. And it's not that you don't do all of them, but the ones at the top bring you joy.
I also got to like other stuff, so.
I want to take a look at that.
Yeah, so I know like which ones of mine are actually like probably should be worked on based on their comparison with the general population.
Well, but keep in mind, the general population is low in spirituality, low in prudence, low in self-regulation. So like, if those were yours, don't worry.
Yeah, but
You're in good company.
That's where the percentages comes in. So it's like with the GRE scores, you answered in comparison to the rest of the population. self-regulation. So there's the standard, but then there's also the percentage.
Right.
Which would be like,
But I think the key is to recognize your top 5 and how can you use those more.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we know about the human brain, and this comes from Marcus Buckingham, David Rock, the neuroscience Gallup kind of guys, is that when you're not using a strength, it's like you're whacking brush on the side of the highway. You're like, you know, it's hard work, you're sweating, you're miserable, right? And when you're using your strength, you're speeding along the highway in your brain. So, like, and I was just also talking about, there's an instance now where I'm going to need to do some leadership, this little project I'm working on with Sunette. And I'm like, you know what? It's in the middle. It's not in the top. But if I'm going to lead, then I need to use my love of learning and my creativity to, like, how can I kind of boost this up? But I'm trying to filter it through the other ones because it's not something that just I feel, you know, so energized by doing. And so it's harder for me.
yeah. But I guess the way that I look at it is the last ones I see as being like really of an unequivocal benefit. So what I would consider like to be probably something that I could do is use my top 5 and apply them to my bottom 4 or
Yeah.
something like that, to utilize those strengths to get some of the benefits from these things that, like, I mean, self-regulation is really, I could use more of that.
We all could, right? We all
Yeah.
could with that. But I also think, like, it's also everybody's weakness. So it's kind of like it's the human condition. But yeah, there are a few that specifically kind of stand out to me in terms of what I know in the research, and that's hope and gratitude and zest. Those tend to, like, really be tied to some good outcomes. So if there was 3 that you were going to, like, work on boosting, those would be it. And, you know, I think my zest might be more, but they always ask this, like, are you going to jump out of bed in the morning? And I'm like, no, not for anything. Like, that's never going to happen. So I think that knocks my zest down lower than it could be.
That was another thing the conversation was, like, considering what of those questions went into each one of these. Like, you know, I ranked really high on curiosity and perspective and judgment, which I associated a lot with my love of learning, but I do it, like, all through audiovisual stuff and, like, watching lectures and whatnot. So the whole, like, reading books thing was like, I don't read many books at all. And I feel like that probably
That knocked your love of learning down.
learning.
Yeah, and I'm, like, obsessed with my books, and love of learning is number 1 for me, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, I'm the person that's carrying, like, a whole suitcase on vacation because I won't get a Kindle.
But I absolutely have a love of learning, like, extremely. It's just not through reading. It's through
Yeah.
different. So it was interesting to consider, like, how that in particular might have shot that down.
Yeah.
Because, like you said,
Because now people are learning a lot of different ways, right? Especially on the internet. You know, another thing I think that's important to think about is, were you, you know, kind of globally thinking about yourself, or thinking about yourself at work, or thinking about yourself at school, you know? So that can also, I think, give different results. We know people are context specific, you know, so my personality at home and at work can be slightly different. Okay, so the next thing that I want you to talk about with your pair, your partner, is thinking back on a different time, like kind of really pulling on when do you use these strengths to really succeed? And conversely, when are some times, like, they've been really hard for you, and which strength could you have used? That's the next question.
judgment for the second question. The first question is what again? Okay. So,
Which is like not the
perspective is that's helpful. It's in retrospect, but still, it helps me. Forgiveness is really because I don't like externally. Most do it internally, but I learned, like, there's a lot of questions that I have to get back. I want to punish people for, yeah, so I don't do that at all. And so that, even though I can ruminate, myself up, it says, like, definitely do that. And there's no somebody. You know, it might be some like shopping for it or something. I'm not gonna be like, I want something. And so, yeah, so one thing I'm using now is I'm dealing with just using judgment. I got it's one that because yeah, like I haven't gotten answers from anything. And I know one of them people have gotten answers from, but any of the others, like, so it's just weird that out of the ones I applied to, I'm the one person that had someone's right. I like this. Except there was one that I didn't have. Yeah, so that's something I can do. I know my love is really that was like a big because it's interesting particularly those sharing reciprocating values. So that's where it's just like I really yes, I understand.
Honestly, a lot of it's right now. And it just like makes me thankful for like the good things in the past. Are completely different than like there's
Yeah.
and I guess just maybe
Yeah. I wonder why so self-regulation wants to be there. Because I can do things.
Okay, so how did that go in terms of thinking of a time when you were doing really well and thinking about your strengths, what you were using, but then also thinking of a time when you had a rough time and which strength, which one of those top 5, 6, 7 could you have pulled on? Anybody have a good example to share? Yeah.
Well, I kind of just have like a perspective is that it was a little difficult to come up with the difficult time example than the good time for some reason. And I thought it would be a little different. I tend to think on more of the negatives than the positives. But in this case, I could come up with a whole bunch of positives. And so, yeah, that was really interesting.
Well, because we primed you for strengths. Now you're thinking
There
of
you
the
go.
positives.
Yeah. That point of view, but I chose kindness as the one that I want to use more specifically. I should be more kind to myself because then I can learn kind to others.
Yeah, and that came up actually in this morning. I'm going to make sure I'm like recorded. Somebody actually said when I'm in a really tough situation, if I use the kindness towards myself, and I was like, wow, yes, yeah, right. And we've talked about that in the last semester about being kind to yourself. But yeah, that was just a mind shift that was hard, that was awesome, but also hard to think about. So yeah, thanks for reminding me of that. Anybody else have a good one to share? Yeah.
I mean, with regards to the thing that I'm struggling with, just on that thing, forgiveness, because I saw like kindness is really applied to others in the way it's articulated, but forgiveness for myself and stuff like that. And then interestingly enough, like judgment is something that I was rated very highly on, and it's all these components are listed, and one of them I'm like, that's not me. And then so it's thinking things through and examining them from all sides. Definitely examine things from all sides. Being able to change one's mind in light of evidence, absolutely. Weighing all the evidence fairly, definitely. Not jumping to conclusions, not me.
That was, you know what? No, that was me too.
Yeah.
That's my number 3. But I was like, yep, me. I had the same experience, but it was like that one. No, that's where I get into trouble.
Yeah. So
but,
when I think of which one I can pull on to, because my issue with this stuff is jumping to conclusions. So maybe my assets in the other parts of judgment can be utilized to help me out with that.
Going back and re-examining that. So, right, so, yeah, we all can't be perfect, but maybe you jump, but you're able to go back and be like, oh, that's wrong. And it was like, yeah, no, I had the same experience on that. And the other thing is I've done the Gallup, and I'd really encourage you, if you haven't done the Gallup, it's $30. I have you do the free one. But the Gallup it's more verb. It's more action. And I like that because my number 2 is activator, which is rush into action. Like if somebody presents a problem and I'm like, let's solve it. Let's get it done. And I don't pause. And so I was like, how is this working with this judgment, and the judgment in the Gallup, it's analytical, right? But I'm like, no, because I jump in and.
Mine, I feel like it's all like retrospective. Like that's the thing. Like when it comes to evidence and like being convinced and stuff, I totally, can be. But when it comes to like conclusions and whatnot, that like just happens in that moment, and then the other aspects happen after the moment, where I can kind of look back and use those other attributes of judgment. Just really quickly though, the Gallup thing, that's not via.
No, the Gallup's not via. It is. You can do Gallup. It's called Strengths Finder. And again, I have not bought the VIA report. I want to take a look at yours, because when I read their description, I thought, I don't think I really need that. Because one, I'm like, you're not supposed to work on your bottom, so I don't really want to pay for
an extra thing. But their report is 26 pages long. I could print that.
No, yeah, I want to look at that. But the Gallup report I found really useful. Again, it was a lot of verbs. And the other thing it says, you do this, you tend to do this. You would be in this situation, you pair good with this strength person. And remember, Gallup does this and sells this to companies. And I've had a couple students who've used it, or their companies used it, and so they show me like the videos they get and the things they do, but they really like round out their team. So they're like looking, when they hire, they're like, okay, we're looking for a person who's strong in this because we don't have it. So they balance out their team that way. And I think that's a great way to use it. Okay, so the next activity is, let me give you this handout. We're going to do this energy audit. I'm going to have to back to it. Okay, and so the next thing you're going to do is, and you don't need this sheet of paper, I just made it to make it easier. We're going to fill out the top, and you just want to jot down really quickly what your top 5 are, or the top 5 you feel comfortable working with, and then jot down in these blank spaces where you find your energy at work, so or at school, could be whatever you want to do, but just kind of jotting down, when is it that you're finding energy? What is it that you're doing?
So they don't have to be on this top list.
Oh no, yeah, ignore the strengths. Just write down where you find your energy. So just to give you an example, for me, and I was talking earlier with my partner, creating new trainings. That really, like, you know, I'm in the flow. I'm in flow. I'm in the zone. I'm, you know, got my office door shut. I've got music going. I'm like, I'm really in it. Like, I don't want to stop.
This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so you've written down where you find energy at work. You've got your strengths. You've checked where you find your strengths. What was that like? Was it easy to see where you get energy and where you're using your strengths? Yeah?
Yeah, you could just board things. I felt like, you know, I had to write 10.
Might be more difficult with more things. Anybody else?
It wasn't that easy for me.
It wasn't that easy for you. Yeah, I noticed you hesitated to write down like the things that energized you at work.
And it kept coming back to the same thing. Just kept, I mean, even though I got my strength, but it all of them came down to just helping, being of service, just service. How can I help? How can we get this about this? How can we fix this? How can we work through this? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so I just try my best to.
But what strength were you pulling on? I mean, that's love, right? You're pulling on all of them.
Yeah, it was love and kindness. It was both of those. But I was like, again, like, how is that showing
When are
up?
you feeling you're engaged? Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, maybe think about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
Well, I was trying to find out what you mean by energy, because in the morning I have a ton of energy and I can almost do anything at work. It
I'm
doesn't matter.
so jealous.
But you know, I don't know. I think it just started recently, something again. But I put down for school when I tutor that I get a lot of energy from that, because it's great to see someone getting what to do, now to get it, and they just go from there. So I put the skill of love of learning, because I can share that with someone.
Yeah. But what are your other I mean, I'm seeing some love and some kindness and
Oh, yeah, my top appreciation of beauty and excellence, kindness, gratitude, humor, and love. So kind of incorporated with
yeah, that's a lot of kindness too, to like take your time to tutor.
someone helped me once, I figured.
Yeah, right. So good. Okay, so now we're going to go to the bottom half of the sheet, and I want you to jot down where do you find you're getting yourself stuck at work. And by that I mean low, like you don't want to do it, slow energy.
I did.
Oh, you did them
I
all.
did them all one sitting, so.
Oh, you guys did them all? Okay, we'll give just a couple minutes for anybody who did. Okay, so anyone willing to share?
The bottom stuff.
Yeah, the bottom stuff, the stuff that you dread.
I think the interesting thing for me is it was almost like the bottom stuff was a part of the top stuff, but it was like the other side of it. So, like for example, for the top one, I feel energized when I'm talking about things, that I know about and I'm asked, about those. And then for the bottom, like talking too much was definitely a place where I find myself getting stuck. So there's like that sort of yin and yang to the top and bottom.
Okay, so did you think of a strength like that you could help? Maybe judgment or I don't know. Perspective, yeah. So maybe like jotting down a note, like how could that help? I know mine is email I get a lot of email and it's overwhelming and we have a really short time to respond in. And so, you know, I can come back to my desk and just feel really like, oh, I only have a few minutes. I've got to respond to everybody. And I get really rushed and frantic about it. And so as my students know, you'll get these like one sentence things because I want to be fair. I want to respond to everybody. You know, I don't want to leave anybody out, but then it's a short, curt thing. And so one of the things that I try to do is to think of it as an opportunity to show kindness. And so then that can transform this really unpleasant task that I dread into an opportunity to be kind, to help someone, because that feels good to me. And when I frame it that way, it's like, oh yeah, this is great, I feel good, versus this like, oh my God, one more email and I'm gonna lose my mind, right? Anybody else?
I was gonna say for mine, I really hate going to these feedback meetings with this one team that is really picky. So I think I can kind of leverage my judgment a little better in those meetings and kind of make them more exciting for me, just to kind of be able to get people on board with like certain candidates that we're bringing in. So being able to kind of examine the situation from all different angles. So like from the candidate's viewpoint, from the hiring manager, the different interviewers, and like recruiting.
Okay, so you're using judgment to really help with a client who's super picky.
Yeah.
So yeah, so pulling on that strength. That's a good example. Thanks. Anybody else? Okay, so that's it for this week. But what I'm going to ask you to do, and I'm going to put up a discussion board probably tomorrow. How are you using your strengths? I just want you to take this week to notice how you're using them, to look for when you have energy or when you feel drained. And when you feel energized, I want you to notice what strengths are operating. And next week, we'll work a little bit more on this flow audit play sheet. So if you want to kind of take a look at that and play around with it, you can feel free to. But that's it. Any questions? All right, thank you guys.